I worked in oncology, which is cancer care. And as most of us know, cancer treatment is extremely, extremely expensive, especially if your insurance does not cover it. So as I was working in oncology, I saw many of my patients go into just crippling debt and, all to just stay alive. So I ended up transitioning my career into a more administrative role that dealt with the reimbursement systems of the hospitals and, how that worked. And once I figured out how it worked, I was extremely surprised that I, as a nurse and most healthcare workers, didn't know any of how the reimbursement system works. And more importantly, patients don't know how it works. So I ended up leaving my job to educate the world on what's going on.
Well, it's appreciated. It is clearly needed. I think part of your popularity, other than the fact that you're just very good at breaking these topics down, is that none of us know what's going on. Like we're just all completely clueless when it comes to our healthcare system and how we should be charged and how we should navigate all of this stuff. And you did this amazing video on negotiating medical bills, and you had these 6 steps that you outlined. And I was just sitting there. I watched it several times because I was just like, I didn't know any of this. Didn't know I could do any of these things to try to help with the cost of my medical care. So if you wouldn't mind, could you kind of walk us through how you approach negotiating medical bills?
Yeah, so most people, when they get a medical bill, they look at it, they see this astronomical cost, and then they just say, like, either I can't pay this, I'm just going to let it go to collections because there's no way I'm ever going to be able to pay this, or I'm going to call the hospital and get on a payment plan. And people need to know that there are other options. Usually when you get a medical bill, number one, it's not typically accurate. So they have done studies where medical bills, up to 80% of them have billing errors. So they are not billed correctly, which is wild.
Ridiculous.
Which is wild because could you imagine going into any other store and 80% of the time you're charged incorrectly? Like that store would be they'd be shut down in a second, right? But for hospitals, it's very, very common that they are billed incorrectly. And number two, they have programs for specific populations of people that allow you to get free or reduced care as mandated by the government. So a lot of people don't know. So let's just walk through what you need to do. And number one is that you need to apply for charity care. So every nonprofit hospital in the United States is required to provide charity care for low income patients. Now, when I say that, I want to add caveats to it because a lot of people say, I have a decent income. I'm never going to qualify for that. Like I'm not that poor, right? So they end up not applying for charity care, and they don't understand that many hospitals will tier charity care. So usually 200% of the federal poverty line or below, you get your bill completely wiped out. You don't have to pay anything. If you do have to pay something, it's an extremely small amount. But then hospitals tier reductions in your bill up to like 500%. So let's say a family of 4 making less than $53,000 a year, they're going to get their bill completely wiped out. And then
really that high,
because that's 200% of the federal poverty line. And that's what most hospitals do. Now, there's also another caveat here that says that hospitals kind of get to make up their own rules. So some of them are less generous than others. But yeah, I have seen it go. I mean, patients making $100,000 a year, I have seen them, depending on their family size, get large portions of their bill reduced. So that's the number one thing that I tell people. Like, if you went to a nonprofit hospital, which most hospitals are nonprofit, apply for charity care first. And there are different ways to do that. You can go straight through the hospital, but sometimes, they're not too receptive of it. They'll try to put you on a payment plan. So there's also a free organization called $4.org, and they will hold the hospital accountable for you. They'll submit your charity care application and follow up and make sure that the hospital is doing what they're supposed to do. So that's number one.
Oh, and Christy, I would ask you just a quick follow-up question on that. Is this only regards to like things you would need to, I guess, check into the hospital for, or would this be like if your doctor is at the hospital and you get like, routine things done?
So if as long as it is attached to the hospital, you can apply. They don't always have to do it for outpatient services. So if you got like a scan you just went into the hospital to get like an x-ray or to see a doctor, they don't always have to do it for that. But anytime that you are admitted to the hospital or in their ER, you can apply for charity care. But either way, try it, because there's no harm in seeing what's out there, right?
Yeah, exactly. Okay, sorry I interrupted you. I'll let you keep going.
Yeah, no problem. So expanding on that a little bit more, you have 240 days, so almost 8 months past when they billed you to apply for charity care. So I know some people will come to me and say, hey, I'm already in collections. How do I pay this? And I'm like, did you apply for charity care? And they're like, well, no, I'm in collections already. It doesn't matter. If it is 8 months from your first bill, you can still apply for charity care. So I encourage people to do that. That's number one. Next, if you don't qualify for charity care, ask for an itemized bill. And what that bill is going to do is it's going to break down the charges, because when you get the bill in the mail, it's just the total, right? You're just seeing that huge number and it doesn't explain any further than that. So have them break it down by descriptions and codes, which is going to be a little bit overwhelming, but I'll tell you how to get through that. So when they break it down, the next thing you're going to do is you're going to check for errors. And like I said, 80% of hospital bills have errors. So that means that they charge you for something that you didn't get, or they charged you for 3 of something when you only got 1. And you're just going to have to kind of go through and look and say, did I get that? Didn't I get that? How many of those did I get? And make sure that you're being charged appropriately. And if you are charged for something that you didn't get, or they're saying that you got more than what you did, you need to make a note of that and follow up with the hospital and say, hey, I didn't get this. You're charging me fraudulently. So the next part of that is, once you get down to, okay, these are the services that I actually got, you can actually check what is a fair price for those services, because the biggest issue we have with hospitals is price gouging. Because, when you come in and your options are to, sign a financial consent or die, you're going to sign your financial consent, right? And so they can pretty much away. Exactly. So they can charge you whatever they want according to them, but that's not actually how it works. So when you check a fair price, there is a website called fairhealthconsumer.org. And what you can do is you can go type in the procedures that you got, and it will show you the average price for that procedure in your area. So it takes into account that, different counties charge different things. So you're going to look at that average price and you're going to write it down and compare it to the price that you are actually charged. And most of the time, the price that comes on your itemized bill is going to be way higher than what the average price is.
Wow. You could have given me a million opportunities to try to guess what I should do. And I would have never thought, I can go look up the price and then compare. Because you just assume that, well, the hospital billed me, this is how much it costs, right? Like you think, it's like thinking of, like, if I go to the store, the grocery store, and they say that this loaf of bread is, $4. I'm not gonna be like, are you sure this is $4? Let me go check the website. So you're not even built to question these charges in this way. So this is like, I'm just fascinated right now.
Oh, exactly. And you're exactly right, because when you go to any other store, you see those prices up front. So you could see at Walmart or at, another grocery store that bread is pretty much $4 no matter where you go, right? You could compare the prices. But since hospitals don't have to, well, they do now, but since hospitals historically have not had to show their prices up front, they can charge whatever they want because you have no point of reference, right? So, go to Fair Health Consumer, check what the fair price is, write it down, and see how that compares to the price that you were charged. Now, the next part is the part where most people get stuck because it's a little bit scary. You are then going to compose a letter and say, hey, you overcharged me significantly for these procedures. Here's what the fair price is in the area. This is what I'm willing to pay you. Accept or don't accept. And whenever I send those letters, it's a certified letter, and then I try to send an email as well. And on the email, I will CC any higher ups that I can find. So I use a website called rocketreach.co. And you can actually look up like who is, the CEO of Methodist Hospital or whatever, or the billing director. And I try to look up as many higher ups that I can, CC them on the email, and then send that email out. Because, frontline billers are wonderful, but they don't have that much power, especially when it comes to changing the prices of services. So if you really want to negotiate that price, you need to get above them. So I'll CC them, I'll send out that letter, and then I'll wait to see what they say back to me. Sometimes it's a lot of back and forth of, you got to, if you're going to stick to your high price, justify it. Why is your price 500 times the average price in your area? And sometimes, they'll try to stick with it and say, this is our prices. This is, we're not changing it. And that point, what I do and what I help patients do, if they are comfortable with it, is just bringing up the notion of, you know what, if you are going to price gouge me and I have all this evidence, I will take you to small claims court. And that's usually where they kind of recoil and say, oh, okay, well, let's give you a deal, because it's not worth the headache for them.
I can imagine they're not excited to get these emails and letters, and they're not going to be like, oh, well, you found us out. Here you go. Here's a discount. So it is going to be, you kind of do have to be firm, right? You can't just back down the moment they push back on you.
You do. And that's where patients benefit from an advocate. But I do tell patients that they are completely capable of doing this on their own, because hospitals use a lot of tactics. And there's some great hospitals out there that will work with patients, but many of them use tactics where they're kind of, shaking the patient down and being like, well, pay this, or we're going to send you to collections, and this is going to affect your credit. And, just really scaring a patient. And when you are a patient with no medical knowledge and you don't know whether the hospital, what they're saying is true or not true, you tend to just say, like, this is what the hospital told me, so this must be what it is. You don't have any other knowledge outside of that. So I really tell patients to stand firm. They know what the fair price is supposed to be. So stand your ground. Don't let them shake you down.
What is the success rate for this type of approach for kind of bringing those bills down?
Well, I mean, it can be very successful. Bringing the bill down almost always occurs, but how much the hospital is willing to negotiate kind of depends on how much you're willing to stand your ground with them. And, some patients can't, not everybody has the privilege of being able to do that back and forth for so long, because eventually it will affect your credit. Eventually there are other things that go on. The hospitals actually can sue as well for the debt. They have been known to garnish wages, which I think is absolutely ridiculous, that you're getting your wages garnished for medical care. So there are some aspects to this where you have to be careful. But as long as those, it's still early, you're within that 8-month mark, you really don't have that much to fear from the hospital. There's nothing that they can do at that point. So I try to negotiate as much as possible within that first year of when the debt occurred, and see what I can get the hospital down to.
So it sounds like it's in your best interest to kind of get in there early, start the process early, so that way you're not up against that clock of them trying to take other measures to kind of force you into paying it. Is it also better if it's a significant, I'm assuming you want to have some type of significant, I guess, difference between what they charged you and what the average is, because it sounds like it's going to be some work, so you probably want to do, if it's like a $20 difference, just leave it alone type of thing. But if it's something, they're charging you $1,000 more than it should be, that's where you're okay, it's really worth that effort.
Yeah, definitely. I have had cases where I go and look at the fair price and it's close to what the hospital charged them, and I'm like, okay, this is a large bill, but they did bill you accurately. So if they did that, you really don't have that much to work with there. There's no really bargaining power other than saying, hey, I can't pay this. What can you do for me? Which brings me to my final point of negotiating a bill. When that does occur, when you get to a point where, you just cannot negotiate any further with the hospital, the last tactic that I try to use is just to make an offer and be firm, but an offer where you're willing to pay in full. So if your bill is, $3,000 and you have $1,500 in your pocket right now, sometimes a hospital would rather just get paid than put you on a payment plan and worry if you're going to pay it or not. So sometimes I have my patients say, hey, if I can pay you $1,500 today to close out my account, mark it paid in full, and we'll be done with this. I won't send you any more letters. I won't CC your director anymore. And sometimes they're willing to do that.
What's a realistic amount that you could offer as a cash, like upfront, paid in full, to where they would realistically be like, okay, we'll take that? Like, is there like a percentage you're aiming for that's like in that, like, okay, this is a real possibility? So
I tell patients to shoot for 50%, at least 50% of the bill. Whenever we get lower than that, the hospitals often, it's a lot harder to negotiate when it's not at least half of the bill. So try for 50%. If it's a really large bill, that's not always possible. And then you can negotiate payment plans from there.
That leads perfectly into the last thing I want to ask here was, what are some of your favorite resources for individuals out there? 'Cause I know you do an amazing job on your side of collecting these different organizations that people can go to when they need help with various situations. So what are a few of your favorites that you've worked with?
Yeah, so I mentioned $4.org. They are absolutely my favorite organization out of all of them, probably. And they do charity care, right? Applications. They hold hospitals to their financial assistance policies and the legal policies, but they're also expanding into medical bill negotiation and some other areas as well. And all of this is always free to the patient. And that's what I really like about them is they're like, we're going to figure out how to keep ourselves running and make money, in other very clean, ethical ways, but we are not going to charge the patient because, the patient is in enough debt as it is. So $4 is one of my favorites. I have a bunch on my website. I love Fair Health Consumer just because you can look up costs, you can compare these ones. For healthcare workers particularly, there is an organization called Impact in Healthcare, and they're kind of like what I would say the lead coalition of healthcare workers coming together and trying to make a better system. So those are probably my top organizations that I love.
Okay, well, thanks for sharing that. I'll make sure we put that in the show notes, and also I'll put a link to your site where you have all your resources listed there. Christy, thank you so much for just taking some time out of your day to talk with me here and to share all this information. Before we go, I'm going to put links to everything in the show notes, but for people just listening, where can they go if they want to catch more of your content, learn more about what you have going on, and all those amazing resources?
Yeah, so I am on TikTok and Instagram at ChristyPRN, and then if you have a question or you want to check out my resources, my website is healthcarereformed.org.
Thank you so much. It's always nice to find a really good resource in situations where things are just so complicated and misunderstood that, we all feel kind of lost and just give up. So I really admire and appreciate the work you do and for providing so much help out there for all of us to try to figure this out and not get ripped off. So thank you.
Yeah, thanks for having me.